Will Chinese economy fall even though they are one of the potential leaders? Back in 1980, the average living space per person in urban China barely surpassed the size of an American kitchen. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that this situation began to see significant improvement. But it wasn't just about space, it was about the quality of life. In the mid-1980s, essentials like piped gas and exclusive access to toilets were luxuries for many urban households. With rapid urbanization, corruption, and poverty exacerbating the issue, there was little motivation to address the housing crisis head-on. During the 80s, housing was primarily the state's responsibility, provided either through local government housing administrations or state-owned enterprises. Rent was low, merely a fraction of average income, detached from construction or maintenance costs. This setup lacked the incentives needed for significant infrastructural development. As China progressed economically, it became evident that the housing situation couldn't sustain the pace of urbanization and modernization. The lack of proper housing infrastructure and incentives for development laid the groundwork for the sudden collapse of the Chinese economy. Why was building new homes in China such a challenging task before Deng Xiaoping's leadership? Before Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China operated under a system where the government tightly controlled almost every aspect of life, including housing. This meant that building new homes was a challenging task. While constructing roads or factories could generate revenue for the government, building houses didn't bring in much money. The lack of investment in housing also meant that living conditions in urban areas were often cramped and substandard. With limited space and resources allocated for housing, many urban residents found themselves living in overcrowded and inadequate conditions. This not only affected people's quality of life, but also hindered the overall development and modernization of urban areas in China. Moreover, the government's focus on controlling housing led to inefficiencies in the housing market. Without competition or incentives for innovation, the housing sector stagnated, unable to adapt to the changing needs of the population. As a result, the housing crisis persisted, with millions of people facing difficulties in finding affordable and suitable housing options. This meant that the housing situation kept getting worse, with overcrowding and poor living conditions becoming the norm. Then, in 1988, a small change was made to the Chinese constitution. It said that the right to use land could be transferred according to the law. This might sound like a minor tweak, but it opened the doors to a huge transformation. Why did China transform its land ownership and housing approach into a money-making opportunity? Before this change, all land in China belonged to the government. But now, local governments got the power to decide how to use the land in their areas. They could sell these land use rights to property developers, who could then build houses and sell them to people who could afford them. This shift turned housing from a burden for the government into a money-making opportunity. Local governments saw it as a way to boost their revenues and fund infrastructure projects. Property developers saw it as a chance to tap into a growing market of Chinese middle-class families who could afford to buy homes. So suddenly, there was a rush to build more houses, and the housing market began to boom. This change not only improved living conditions, but also became a driving force behind China's economic growth. It was like a housing miracle that happened alongside China's economic miracle. The real estate companies in China grew rapidly, with some becoming among the biggest in the world. Evergrande, for example, started small but quickly expanded by building homes and selling them fast. They took big risks by borrowing a lot of money to build as many houses as they could, but it paid off because people kept buying them. Why did housing prices skyrocket in Chinese cities despite lower incomes compared to places like Los Angeles, Paris, and London? In China, housing prices in big cities like Beijing, Shenzhen, and Shanghai went really high, almost as much as in places like Los Angeles, Paris, and London. But here's the thing. Even though the housing prices soared, most people in China didn't earn as much money as people in the US, France, or the UK. Imagine in cities like New York or London. It already takes a big chunk of your yearly earnings to buy a home. In Chinese cities, it's even crazier. By 2018, in a city like Shenzhen, it would take a whopping 41 years of your average yearly income just to buy a regular house. That's way too much. What's even weirder is that even with all these high prices, lots of houses were empty. Can you believe it? There were millions of apartments just sitting there, bought and paid for, but nobody lived in them. It's like buying something and then never using it. This shows that housing wasn't just about having a place to live anymore. Instead, it became more like a toy for rich people to play with, hoping its price would keep going up. This caused a problem, not just for people trying to find a home they could afford, but also for the whole country's economy. So the government stepped in and made some strict rules in August 2020. These rules, called the 3 red lines, were meant to stop the housing market from getting even crazier. What did they say to the property developers? They told property developers they couldn't borrow too much money compared to what they owned. If they broke these rules, they couldn't grow their businesses anymore. It was the government's way of trying to fix the housing mess before it got even worse. The 3 red lines, set by the government, weren't just warnings. Evergrande, one of the biggest property developers, was in trouble because it had too much debt and not enough cash. They broke 2 of the red lines and almost broke the 3rd, so they couldn't borrow more money to finish the homes they promised to buyers. The COVID-19 pandemic made things even worse. While other countries started getting back to normal, China kept strict rules to control the virus, which slowed down the economy. People who moved to cities for work went back to their hometowns because they couldn't afford the high housing costs anymore. Also, China's population was changing. There were fewer young people who could buy homes. Evergrande tried to find money by selling off parts of its business, like an electric vehicle division and a soccer club. But it wasn't enough. Finally, in December 2021, Evergrande couldn't pay back its debts. Credit agencies said it was in default, meaning it couldn't borrow money more easily. Why didn't the government step in to rescue Evergrande, despite widespread expectations that it would? The failure to bail out Evergrande was significant because the company played a massive role in China's economy. However, it wasn't an isolated case, as numerous other property developers were also facing financial difficulties. This posed a major problem for China, given that the property sector was a key driver of its economy. The collapse of these developers not only jeopardized people's savings and investments, but also weakened the overall economic stability of the country. As the property sector faltered, it sent shockwaves through various industries and sectors, affecting employment, consumer spending, and investor confidence. The repercussions were felt not only domestically, but also reverberated globally. Given China's interconnectedness with the international economy, the inability to rescue Evergrande and other struggling developers highlighted broader structural issues within China's economy, raising concerns about the effectiveness of government intervention and the sustainability of growth in the long term. The Chinese government had a tough job ahead. It had to deal with the fallout from Evergrande's collapse and fix the problems in the housing market. If it didn't, it risked breaking the social contract with its people. The Chinese people had always accepted limits on their freedom in exchange for a better economy. But if the economy didn't improve, they might start questioning why they should follow the rules. This was a critical moment for China's future. If you found the video insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.